To start with, I want to share with you some of my favorite Bible miracle stories, ones that I grew up on and really treasured. How about Moses? Somehow in my mind I could just picture those hands going up and I could picture those waters rushing apart. I probably got a lot of my ideas from watching the old Ten Commandments movie back in the 1950s. But what about New Testament miracles? Again, one of the ones that just stuck in my mind was Jesus walking across that water. I could just imagine the guys in the boat looking out and seeing that figure coming toward them and them saying, "What in the world is this? What's going on here?" And of course Peter trying to get out and walk to Jesus with not quite as positive results. But the favorite, everybody's favorite, if you're a Christian, is the story of the resurrection of Jesus. This is one of my favorite views of this, from the inside looking out. Look at that brilliant light on the outside shining on those grave clothes that are empty now. And Jesus is gone, he's resurrected. But you know, Christians love these stories, but I wanted to show you what an outsider view of Christian miracles is like. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 people who are not Christians and how they see miracles. Richard Dawkins, everybody's favorite poster boy for atheism, said this: "The virgin birth, the resurrection, the raising of Lazarus, even the Old Testament miracles, all are freely used for religious propaganda, and they're very effective with an audience of unsophisticates and children." So who are we? I guess since we're not kids, we must be the unsophisticates. So look at that put down there toward the end. These are effective stories as long as you don't know much. Max Planck, who is a well-known physicist way back, times of Einstein, talking about miracles. Here's what he said: "Faith in miracles must yield ground step by step before the steady and firm advance of the forces of science, and its total defeat is indubitably a mere matter of time." See, this is the picture that some scientists have. They say, okay, we get it. Way back when people believed in miracles, they heard the thunder, saw the lightning, and said it must be the gods bowling, some kind of miracle going on up in the heavens. And now we know what thunder and lightning really is, so therefore you didn't need a miracle to explain it. So gradually science is going to clear the darkness, and finally everybody will understand everything and there won't be any more miracles. Here's one more man, Adam Gopnik, who's a writer, and what he had to say about miracles. "We know that in the billions of years of the universe's existence, there's no evidence of a single miraculous interaction with the laws of nature." Wow. Let that sink in for just a minute. Apparently, Mr. Gopnik knows the entire universe's history. Billions of years. Good for him. How did he get that? He would have to be God, wouldn't he? He says, no evidence over the billions of years. What sample of those billions of years does he have? About that much. C.S. Lewis, who's going to say something now, he's a Christian, but he's going to say something about miracles as far as why we want them to be real, why we argue for their reality. He says all the essentials of Hinduism would remain unimpaired if you subtracted miracles, and the same is almost true of Islam, but you can't do that with Christianity. It's precisely the story of a great miracle, a naturalistic, meaning no God, just nature's all there is. A naturalistic Christianity leaves out all that is specifically Christian. So do you see what he's saying? We have all these other religions, and none of them involve anything miraculous that you have to hold on to that's part of the faith. Take Islam. You can take Muhammad out of it, you still have Islam. You have those 5 pillars that you're supposed to do. You take Joseph Smith out of Mormonism, you still work your way, become a god. But if you take Jesus Christ out of Christianity, what do you have? The whole thing collapses. It depends on one particular miracle, but a lot of miracles along the way. So what are we talking about when we're talking about a definition of a miracle? Well, I like what Eric Metaxas said. He's one of my favorite authors. I hope you have a chance to read some of his works. He had a book on Bonhoeffer. He's got one on the American Republic in the early days of Christianity. The early days of the United States. Here's what he said: "A miracle is when something outside of space and time, which is to say outside this world that we're so used to, the material and natural world, something outside space and time reaches in, it enters space and time, whether just to wink at us or to poke at us briefly, or this is what we believe as Christians, to come in and dwell among us for 3 decades. Of course, he's talking about Jesus Christ at that point. So let's go through several reasons why we think there are miracles. And then I want to save the last part of the class to talk about objections that are raised against miracles by those who are outside of Christianity. So I think your best bet, your best argument that you can make for the truth of Christianity and for the existence of miracles is to start with the most obvious thing. We think there's plenty of good evidence for the existence of God. And we're going to cover some of these later on in another series, but the beginning of the universe. How do you get a universe here without something from the outside bringing it into existence? The universe can't produce itself. Something has to produce the effect. The effect is the universe. What produced that? Some people say, well, you got the Big Bang. You need a Big Banger. You need somebody to strike that match, light the fuse, and bring that universe into existence. At one time, there was no universe. Nothing. No matter, space, time, or energy. And then it was existent. So what did that? Well, a terrific argument is God. Here's a second argument. How do you get, now that you have the universe here, how do you get life started? At one time, people said, oh, that's pretty easy. Look at the cells. Cells are simple. It's just a bag of protoplasm with a real simple nucleus on the inside. Well, as you probably know, over the last 30, 40 years, scientists have looked into the cell and determined, oh no, this is nothing simple. Even the tiniest microscopic life, a single cell, is a miniature city. It has so many functions. It's got factories at work inside there. And so scientists are really stumped. How do you get life from non-life? How do you get just material stuff to form in such a way to create life? That's an amazing argument for the existence of God. Here's a third one. Design. There's design in the big part of the universe, way out there, and there's design within us, down on the microscopic, the cellular level. And I have a separate talk on that, recent scientific discoveries, and you can look at that sometime. But just real quickly, the Earth seems exactly right. We have the right kind of sun. Do you know they spent 50 years trying to look for life out in space? They've examined hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stars. They haven't found a single star that shares the characteristic of our sun that would allow life to exist, intelligent life to exist here on Earth. So you have design out in the universe, the right kind of galaxy that's spinning around out in space. The kind of expansion rate of the universe that's going on has to be precisely the right kind. So you have all these big things that have to be exactly right, but you also have the small stuff, design inside of us. Some terrific software engineer created DNA. That's software. That's engineered instruction on how to build a human being. Bill Gates said it's the most complicated computer code ever. Does Bill Gates know computers? Yes. Do I trust him on this? Yes. How about morality? Where do we get morality? If it's not from God, then we're just making up as we go along. And we don't believe that. We don't think that that's just your taste or your belief. We say, no, some things are wrong or some things are always right, beyond what we believe as a society. So where does that come from? People suggest God. One more argument for the existence of God, consciousness. Again, think about rocks, think about gases in the air, think about anything that's formed a planet. How does that material stuff come together and all of a sudden become aware, to know that it's living, and to be able to have intent and motive and to think about itself? How does a brain, for example, the chunk of material in your head, how is it now aware of itself as a brain? How does consciousness work? Scientists are totally puzzled. But we're not puzzled if we believe there's a God beyond who has infused a mind into us. There are plenty of good scientific arguments as well for the case of miracles. At one time, Isaac Newton came along and he put together laws that talked about the universe, and it suggested that the universe was like a tremendous clock with a lot of gears. Yes, it was complicated, but it was like all the gears meshed and functioned really well, and all the planets went around their little circular orbits, and everything was fine. Well, that was fine. You didn't really need a God to intervene at that point. You didn't need miracles. You could think about God as somebody who's wound up that clock and then left and didn't get involved in miracles. That would be a deist view of God. What have we seen in the last 100 years? Heisenberg talked about an uncertainty principle that's in existence. Einstein talked about things that just made people's heads fly apart because it was counterintuitive. It was not a rational clockwork kind of universe that he was talking about. Space-time is, in a sense, a substance that stretches as objects move through it. The quantum world was talked about and postulated. Some people suggest at the Big Bang there was something like 11, at least science is starting to go this direction, that because of calculations, it's believed that at the beginning of the universe, when it first came into existence, the Big Bang, there was something like 11 dimensions. And now we're down to space and time and height and width. You know, we just have like so many fewer. Where are these other dimensions? Some people say they're rolled up and they're actually still in this universe. They may be a part of what they call string theory. But I mean, do you see how the miraculous, all of a sudden, if you have extra dimensions playing around here, you could have some strange things going on. Somebody told me there's a short movie that shows how you can take a basketball and rotate it through extra dimensions and turn it inside out without slitting it. Well, that seems miraculous to me. That's just small stuff. But it gives you an idea that things way beyond what we're capable of understanding may be possible in this universe. David Brooks, a well-known political commentator, had an article one time. It's called Neural Buddhists. And here's what he said, just a quick summary of his article. He said at one time there were all these material scientists that said there's no soul, there are no miracles, it's just this world, it's just the stuff here in this world. And new atheists came along in the last 15, 20 years, including Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. Those are the four horsemen, they call them, of the apocalypse. They've argued the same thing. No, there's no such thing as miracles. Forget the idea of a soul. It's whatever you've got under your nails. There's just the material world. But he says in this article that the momentum now is shifting from this hardcore materialism idea, that there may be something beyond this world. He says we have moral intuitions, we have consciousness. We're back to that argument of consciousness. Emotions, where are emotions coming from? Now he talks about people who have experienced elevated spiritual states, and people are now beginning to believe in the sacred more than they used to. They say there's more going on in this universe than just a clock with gears. And he says science and mysticism are actually joining. So the avenue or the door is being opened to the possibility of miracles far more than it was 100 years ago. In fact, I'm going to share with you some quotations from scientists. These are not Christians, so I want you to understand that. I love to use non-Christians so that they will support and they will argue my case without me having to go to Christians. So for example, 3 Stanford physicists in a Nature interview after they'd published a paper said this: arranging the universe as we think it's arranged would have required a miracle. An unknown agent beyond space and time intervened in the evolution of the universe for reasons of its own. So they don't know who or what it is out there, but they said something has happened to arrange and bring about the exact parameters of this universe to allow life to exist. They said that would require a miracle. And these are scientists, hardcore scientists, atheists who are saying this. How about Discover magazine? Not exactly a bastion of Christianity. They said the universe is unlikely. And then, if you didn't get it, they repeat it. Very unlikely. And if it still didn't ring a bell, deeply, shockingly unlikely. And they used the italics. So they didn't use the word miracle, but you see, that's about where they are by the time they've written those 3 sentences. This universe shouldn't be here, but it is. That's highly unlikely. Well, things highly unlikely, very, very deeply and shockingly unlikely, may be next door to miraculous. How about Michael Denton, not a believer? The complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it's impossible to accept that such an object, he's talking about the cells now, the small scale, It's impossible to accept that such an object could have been just thrown together by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle. Here he is talking miracles again. New York Times, actually a very hostile place when it comes to Christianity. The chemistry of the first life. How do you get life started? They said the chemistry of the first life is a nightmare to explain. No one has yet developed a plausible explanation to show how the earliest chemicals of life might have constructed themselves from the inorganic chemicals likely to have been around on early Earth. How did these chemicals decide to come together and become life? The spontaneous assembly of the RNA molecule on the primitive Earth would have been a near miracle, two experts on the subject helpfully declared last year. Would have been a near miracle. I love that, a near miracle. They don't really want to talk miracles because that puts them into a new category of, well, a miracle is something outside of space and time. So no, it's a near miracle. Well, that's good enough for me. How about the case for miracles from somewhere else? So we've talked about it from science. We talked about it from the existence of God. What about the reliability of the New Testament? After all, the New Testament has miracles in it performed by Jesus. And actually some miracles performed by the early apostles. So can you trust the New Testament? Is somebody just making this stuff up? No. First of all, why do we trust the New Testament? More than any other ancient piece of writing, we have more manuscripts that we can look at and see if anybody tried to insert and create something. No. We have so many, and they're in so many parts of the world, it would have been impossible to go around and create stories. They're telling the same story. Plus, the copies that we have are extremely close, closer than any other ancient document, closer to the originals. We don't have the originals, but we don't have the originals for Caesar or Plato or Herodotus or Homer. We don't have their originals either. So if you match the gospel accounts, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John accounts, and letters of Paul and all, if you match all that New Testament writing compared to these others, the New Testament wins because they're so much closer to the original, which means less chance for somebody to add something and create something different. Plus, they're written by eyewitnesses. This is a separate talk. I have a talk called Are the Gospels Reliable? And you can go to my website. That's apologeticsforlife.org, all one word. Apologeticsforlife, F-O-R, apologeticsforlife.org. And you can click on my talk there about the New Testament reliability. The Gospels were written by eyewitnesses. Many reasons why. I won't talk about that today. And the stories about Jesus. We find the stories of Jesus not only in the Gospels, but here's an interesting thing. You can find them in the letters of Paul, in things called creeds. They're like little nuggets that Paul just casually references once in a while. He just tosses them out there. And people today, scholars, are looking at these and mining them for all sorts of treasures. Because Paul's creeds actually predate the writing of the Gospels. And so you've got, in some cases, people think it's the fall of the year that Jesus died. You have references to the life of Jesus, and including the resurrection. So we know the resurrection is not a later addition. These stories were going around from the very beginning. They're not legend. They're even supported by some of the enemies. The Talmud, which is a Jewish writing, a rabbinical writing of commentaries on the laws and all, hundreds of years after Jesus, they said, Jesus, Yeshua, Yesu, was put to death for sorcery. Well, do you hear what they're admitting there? They didn't say he was put to death because he got under everybody's skin. They said he was a sorcerer. You know what that means? They're admitting that he did things that nobody else could do without the help of some kind of outside influence. That's a miracle. So Jesus was performing miracles. Even his enemies say that. And of course the resurrection is solid on a historical basis. Again, I have a talk about the resurrection. You can take a look at that. I think also we can use our own experiences as evidence for the possibility of miracles. One-fourth of Americans, when interviewed, said that they themselves have experienced a miracle. And then I'm sure some of you have friends that you trust, you think they're reliable, and they've told you about miracles. So my guess is many of you have either experienced a miracle or you know people who have experienced a miracle. Let me suggest a book by Eric Metaxas down there. It's called Miracles, strangely enough. And Metaxas spends quite a bit of time talking about people that he knew, that he trusts, and he lets them tell their stories about miracles that they've experienced. That's one man, Eric Metaxas, who's seen this and has heard these stories of miracles. Craig Keener has a book called Miracles. It's actually a 2-volume book where he looks at miracles not just from one place but around the world. Miracles are occurring often in places all over the globe. There's another one that you might like called Signs and Wonders in America Today, written by a woman that just looks at the United States, and she talks about specific times, specific places, and specific people. So you could look them up if you wanted to. And it's just story after story. It just lifts your spirits when she tells stories about ordinary people who, through prayer, through steadfast faith, have experienced some amazing miracles involving doctors, involving all sorts of things. Powerful stories that she's checked on. So those are some of the evidences for miracles. Let's look at the objections. Are there objections to miracles? Sure. You know there are. How about this one? They violate natural law. Have you heard that one before? They violate natural law. But do they? Natural laws tell you what's happened in the past. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Therefore, we think there's a law in effect there. But miracles don't change the law. They interrupt the law, but they don't violate it. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me make a third point here. Miracles don't contradict science. They're not a contradiction. They're outside of science. Science deals with the material world. What do we say a miracle is? An interaction from outside the material world. So the material world has a hard time dealing with miracles. Science is not contradicted by miracles. Let me give you a simple illustration about the point about violating natural laws. If I let go of this little clicker, why is it falling? Something called gravity. Actually, scientists are still having a hard time figuring out how does gravity work? What is it? But that's gravity, letting it go. And it'll happen time after time after time. I could bore you for the next 40 minutes dropping this and trying to grab it. What if I take my hand away and let it go? It's going to land on the floor. That'll happen every time unless I stick a hand in and I interrupt the flow of gravity. So what did I do? Did I just violate gravity? No, gravity's still in effect. I didn't turn the switch off on gravity. Gravity will work if I don't put my hand here, and I'll drop it on the floor, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to quit messing with this thing. But you see what's happened? As I let that go and I reach with my other hand, I'm not violating, I'm interacting, and I'm interrupting that flow of gravity, but if I let it go, it'll crash anyway. C.S. Lewis said this: "The laws of nature do not define an outcome, but a process. They tell you what not must happen, but what will happen in the natural course if you don't catch things." And he gave an example like I just did, except he used something a little riskier. He said, we've got a beautiful porcelain vase, and you let it go. It's going to crash and break into a whole lot of pieces. But he said, what if you let that vase go and then you reach down and grab it before it hits the ground? That's the same principle, isn't it? Are you violating gravity? Absolutely not. Let's talk about, I want to share with you something from John Lennox. I love John Lennox, another one of my favorite authors. Take a look on YouTube. He's got all sorts of books out. A fabulous speaker. Looks like a jolly Santa Claus kind of character, but a sharp guy, a mathematician at Oxford. He said, when a miracle takes place, it's the laws of nature that alert us to the fact that it is a miracle, because there are these laws of nature. Christians don't deny the laws of nature as descriptions of those regularities and cause-effect relationships built into the universe by its creator. If we did not know them, talking about these laws like gravity, if we didn't know them, we should never recognize a miracle if we saw one. So he's saying Christians aren't stupid. They don't look at everything and say, oh, it's all a miracle. No, we understand laws. There are plenty of good Christians who are scientists. In fact, early scientists were all Christians. They knew what God could do, and they didn't say everything's a miracle. They knew there were some certain repeatable laws of nature out there, and they could distinguish between the two. In fact, you need the laws to figure out when the law is being subjected to some outside force. So Christians are not stupid about this. They say, yeah, we get it. We understand their laws of nature. Let's talk about David Hume. David Hume, back in the 1700s, came up with this little logical formula that he thought destroyed miracles forever. And in fact, ever since, people have latched onto this and they said, oh, Hume's done it. He's gotten rid of the idea of miracles. So let me run through the 5 points. I want to find out what you're thinking about here. Number 1, natural law describes a regular occurrence. So the sun always coming up in a certain way, flowers blooming a certain time of the year, hydrogen gas acting a certain way. So he said you get these natural laws, you get a regular occurrence. That's why you can make the law. Number 2, a miracle is a rare occurrence. So you got the regular occurrences and you got the rare occurrences. Number 3, evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare. He says, number 4, well, you ought to base your belief on where the greater evidence is. He says the greater evidence is on the regular, not on the rare, so therefore you shouldn't believe in miracles. So I want you to think about that for a minute. There's a major problem. I think there are more than one problem. There's a major problem with this. You know what it is? It's number 3. Evidence for the regular is always greater than for the rare. Well, are there exceptions to that? Are there some rare events that we have pretty good evidence for? How about the origin of the universe? We're here. The universe is here. At one time it wasn't here. Is that a rare occurrence? Yes, it's a one-time event. So evidence for that is pretty abundant. How about the origin of life? At one time there's no life, now we have life. Look around. There's evidence. Is that a rare event? Yes. So apparently some rare events, there's plenty of evidence for it. How about the history of the world? How many Napoleons were there? Well, I know there are different names, but how many Napoleons conquered as much territory as we know about Napoleon number 1? There was one. How many Franklin Delano Roosevelts were there? 1. Is that rare? Yes. Do we have evidence that he was for real? Yes. How many George Washingtons were there? 1. How about David Hume himself? He was born once. And yet we feel like there really was a David Hume. Number 2, this idea of, well, evidence for the regular is greater for the rare, that excludes what you might have witnessed and you trust your senses. You may have experienced something. Let's think about number 3. Maybe you went out to a golf course and you watched a guy hit a ball for 150, 200 yards, bang, ka-bang, 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 and it falls into the hole. Everybody goes, woohoo, nice job. And you say, well, wait a minute, not so fast. Evidence for the regular is always greater than for the rare. You did something that's rare, therefore I don't believe it happened. No. You, as rare as it is, you saw it. You saw the guy do it. You followed the flight of the ball. Rare occurrences sometimes are improbable events, but you believe it. So you know what it comes down to, number 4 here. Hume is not weighing the evidence. That's what makes the difference. Some improbable events, you say, no, I don't think so. And you just blow it off because there's nobody you trust who was there. The camera work is pretty shaky. I always think about Bigfoot. You notice they never get a really good shot of Bigfoot. The camera's always pretty shaky and Bigfoot's heading off for the trees there. Maybe you see a footprint here and there. I'm thinking, nah. Same thing maybe with the Loch Ness Monster. Pretty improbable, not very much evidence. But there are things like the resurrection of Jesus. There are other events of history that seem miraculous, but people observe them and you trust what you've heard. So you've got to look at the evidence. Don't say, well, it's rare, I'm going to ignore it. And I'll always go with the regular. If it's rare, what do? You think about it. You get your critical thinking skills going. Is there evidence? Do you trust that evidence? Do you know the people involved? Is there any visual evidence, photographic evidence, things like that? So what's Hume's problem? He's defeating it by definition rather than defeating it thinking it through logically. Here's another objection to miracles. They're anti-science. Well, we just talked about that. Do they hurt science? Do they destroy science? No. You've got the regular world that keeps on functioning, and all we say is that once in a while, God reaches in. That's all we're saying. Miracles do not contradict science. They're outside of science. Think of science like a box, and all the stuff that's in that box is the natural world. Once in a while, we believe God can reach in and pluck out something or do something to that box. And part of it is, and I've got a talk on this called Science, Christianity, and Scientism. Part of the problem is number 2 up there. Science has given us, scientists have given us in the last 40, 50 years a new definition of science. It used to be science involved using the method of science, which is observation and making a hypothesis and then trying to prove whether your hypothesis is true or not. That was science. Follow the evidence wherever it led. Not anymore. Now the definition of science says we draw a boundary so that there is no evidence. We will not think about any evidence. We will not suggest any evidence of some kind of outside influence coming into this world. So they start right off saying no supernatural. Well, that seems awfully unfair, doesn't it? It used to be follow the evidence wherever it leads. Now it says you can only follow the evidence a certain way, which is a material, natural cause. So, very unfair. But if you have a chance, look at the talk sometime that I gave. Here's a 4th objection to miracles. Well, it's kind of like the other. Well, if you believe in miracles, you're not going to do any scientific work. You're just going to look out there, oh, the universe is a miracle. Oh, the human body is a miracle. No. If you believe in miracles, remember, miracles are rare. So it is an orderly world that functions every day with these natural laws. We all believe that there are these natural laws. Miracles, by definition, are going to be rare events. It's not going to change you where you're not going to want to explore anything because you think it's all going to change. Miracles are just happening right and left. Stars are winking in and out of existence. DNA is changing all the time inside of you. Some people die and come back and die and come back. Cars float off and then cars come down. No. We say this is an orderly world. God created an orderly world. Yes, there are miracles, but by definition, they're rare. One more objection to miracles. Maybe one of my favorites. Well, I don't believe in miracles. I've never seen one. Here we go again. Then, aren't we saying, haven't we said all day here, miracles are rare. They're not everyday occurrences. William Lane Craig, I think, said this really well. And he's an excellent Christian defender of the faith, makes great case for Christianity. If there's a creator, remember we were talking about that as one of the reasons to believe in the possibility of miracles. If there's a creator who designed and brought the universe into being, who sustains its existence moment by moment, who's responsible for the very natural laws that govern the physical world, then certainly it's rational to believe the miraculous is possible. It is rational. It depends on the if at the beginning. If there's a God, then any miracle is possible. I don't care what it's like. Maybe it's the parting of the Red Sea like I showed you. Maybe it's the walking on the water. Maybe it's that resurrection of Jesus. All those things are at least rational to believe in, as long as you believe there's a God. And I think you can marshal a lot of good evidence. I have a talk on the existence of God. You can look it up on YouTube or you can look it up on apologeticsforlife.org. How about some good resources? I mentioned on the left there the book by Metaxas called Miracles. There's that 2-volume book by Keener. A couple more. Probably the best single resource, if you just want to put one book up on your shelf, it's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Great title. And Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Faith, has a chapter devoted just to this question about miracles. A couple more. There's that Signs and Wonders I told you about. And then the one on the right by Norm Geisler, called When Skeptics Ask. He has, again, a whole section on miracles. How about a final thought from C.S. Lewis? Miracles are a retelling in small letters of the very same story which is written across the whole world in letters too large for some of us to see. Think about that. That's a great line, isn't it? So a miracle, whatever it is, somebody you know gets cured of a disease, somebody is spared a terrible accident that happens, that person is able to walk away, whatever it is. That's a small letter. It's written in small letters of the very same story, which is written across the whole world. What's written across the whole world? I think he's talking Psalm 19 there. The heavens declare the glory of God. The whole universe is shouting out that there's a God. Our bodies say that. Right now, while you're sitting here, your body's fighting disease, it's creating new blood cells, it's getting rid of, filtering out things you don't want. Your brain cells are doing all sorts of things. They're connecting and reconnecting. Amazing things are going on right now. And sometimes it's written in letters that are too large for some of us to see. The people that look out and say, well, it's just a bunch of stars, just a bunch of gases. Oh, it's way more than that. Linux. Unless you have evidence that the system is totally causally closed. Nothing can come into this universe. It's a box, and the box has its lid on, and the box is taped, and you cannot get into this box. He says if you're sure that the universe is like that, and who would be, you cannot argue against the possibility of miracles. I think he's exactly right. It's up to the other person to make the proof for you. Do you have evidence, solid evidence, that that box is taped shut? If you do, then you can't have miracles. But we're seeing more and more over these last 50 years, that box is opening up. And there are all sorts of things suggesting that there's a God interacting in this universe.